November
The streets of
5th,
Tashkent buzzed with
a
confusion.
new decision has been made
Newspaper
regarding
headlines
waiting
screamed the same
in
shocking
Uzbekistan.
news. New national decision, wedding ceremonies restricted until further notice. Within hours, the city that once sparkled with golden wedding caravans and the rhythmic beat of Dwara drums fell into an uneasy silence. In a small tea house near Chorsu Bazaar, Laylo scrolled through the news on her phone, her eyes narrowing as she read the government decree. The air smelled of cardamom and uncertainty. Around her, elderly men argued about tradition, while a young couple at the next table sat quietly, the girl's eyes red from crying. Laylo's heart ached. She was a journalist, trained to stay objective, but this story felt different. It wasn't just about numbers or policy, it was about love, pride, and the pulse of Uzbek life itself. She took out her small notebook, scribbling questions. How will families react? What will happen to all the brides waiting for their day? At that very moment, in another corner of the city, Jasur closed the lid of a jewelry box. Inside was an engagement ring he'd been saving up for since he started working as an electrical engineer. He had planned a beautiful wedding, music, family, a modest feast, nothing extravagant, but enough to make his fiancée smile. Now, everything was uncertain. The new law banned weddings with more than 20 guests, limited decorations, and even required special permits for ceremonies. He sat quietly by the window, watching rain begin to fall on the gray streets of Tashkent. The city felt colder, smaller. His phone buzzed with messages from friends, all filled with disbelief and frustration. But one message stood out, from his fiancée, Jasur. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe love isn't about the wedding. Maybe it's about us. That night, the television broadcasted the president's address explaining the decision, words about economic responsibility, discipline, and national modesty. Laylo watched from her small apartment, her fingers trembling. Something deep inside told her this was more than just a regulation. It was the beginning of a story that would test the strength of hearts across the country, including her own. 2 days after the decree, the newsroom at Tashkent Times was filled with tension. Reporters whispered in corners, screens glowed with drafts of unfinished articles, and the editor-in-chief paced across the room, worried about which lines might cross the limit. Laylo sat at her desk, rereading her own report. It was supposed to be a neutral piece about the government's new policy, but she couldn't ignore the emotion in her writing. Each sentence carried the voices she had heard from the streets. That morning, she received a call from a friend who worked at a community center. "Laylo, you should come. There's a group of young couples here, they want to talk." They're angry, but also scared. Laylo grabbed her recorder, notebook, and camera. Outside, the sun was bright but the city felt gray. Billboards that once advertised bridal salons were now covered with posters promoting simplicity and order. The music shops that rented out wedding sound systems had closed their doors. It was as if joy itself had been suspended. At the community center, she found a small crowd gathered, brides clutching canceled invitations, grooms arguing with clerks about permits, mothers holding back tears. One young man stood apart, his expression quiet, calm. Laylo noticed the tired look in his eyes, a mix of frustration and sadness. She approached him gently. "Are you one of the couples affected by the restrictions?" she asked. The man nodded. "Yes. My name's Jasur. We were supposed to marry next month." Laylo switched on her recorder. His voice was steady, but there was a heaviness behind it. "I don't blame the government entirely. I understand their reasons, people spend too much. But they forget, weddings aren't just about money. It's about our families, our memories, our unity. Now, they've taken that from us." Laylo looked at him, intrigued. Unlike others, he wasn't shouting or crying. There was quiet strength in his words. She asked if she could follow his story, document how he and his fiancée were coping. He agreed, not knowing this small decision would change both their lives. As they walked outside, the call to prayer echoed softly over the city. Laylo paused to record ambient sound, children laughing in the distance, traffic hum, and the faint melody of an old wedding song playing from a nearby window before it was abruptly turned off. Jasur looked up and smiled bitterly. "It's strange," he said. "Even the music seems afraid now." Laylo lowered her camera and looked at him. For the first time since the announcement, she felt something she hadn't felt in days, warmth. Not hope yet, but the beginning of it. The next morning, the sky over Tashkent hung low and pale, as if mirroring the quiet unease in the city. Laylo woke up early, unable to shake the sound of Jasur's voice from her mind. There was something in it, honesty, courage, maybe even pain, that refused to fade. She replayed the recording again while sipping her bitter black tea, each word echoing through her small apartment. She decided to meet him again. Officially, she told herself it was for a follow-up interview. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She wanted to see how people like Jasur were living now, in the shadow of this new law, how love looked when it was forced to be quiet. Jasur met her near Amir Timur Square. The fountains were still, the usual clusters of brides taking photos were gone, replaced by patrolling officers checking for unauthorized gatherings. Laylo held her camera close as they walked through the near-empty park. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said. Jasur nodded. "It's like they've erased happiness from the streets." He smiled faintly. "But I think love always finds another road." They continued walking, talking about everything, from their childhood dreams to the small things they both missed. The laughter of guests, the music of traditional carnet sernet, the smell of clove cooking at weddings. Every sentence felt like peeling away another layer of silence. At one point, Jasur stopped near a bench, looking at a couple sitting quietly with a small bouquet between them. "They're having their wedding right now," he said softly. The couple wasn't dressed in white or gold, just simple clothes, eyes full of peace. A family member took pictures with an old phone. No guests, no music, no decorations. Just love. Laylo felt her throat tighten. She raised her camera but hesitated. "Do you think it's right for me to film this?" Jasur glanced at her. "Maybe not for the world," he said, "but for history, yes. People should remember how love survived rules." She pressed record. The scene was silent except for the whisper of wind. It was the most powerful thing she had ever captured. Later, as the day dimmed into evening, Jasur offered to walk her home. They passed closed banquet halls and flower shops with faded sale signs. When they reached her building, neither wanted to say goodbye. Laylo finally spoke, her voice soft. "You said love finds another road, maybe this is it." Jasur looked at her for a long moment, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But sometimes, the road begins when you stop being afraid." As he walked away into the dim street, Laylo stood frozen, heart pounding. For the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, not just for the story, but for the man who had become part of it. Inside her apartment, she opened her laptop and began to write. Rain fell softly over Tashkent that evening, turning the streets into a mirror of blurred lights. Laylo sat by her window, typing her latest article, The Quiet Brides of Uzbekistan. The story centered on those who had chosen to marry in silence, without feasts or music, yet with hearts full of strength. She included Jasur's words, carefully changing his name to protect him. Each line she wrote felt like a small act of rebellion, gentle, but dangerous. When she sent the article to her editor, a reply came faster than she expected. "Laylo, this is too emotional. Too risky. The ministry won't like it. Cut the quotes and soften the tone." Her hands froze above the keyboard. She knew what that meant, censorship. The truth was being trimmed to fit comfort. After a long pause, she hit send anyway. The next morning, her article was published online for only 3 hours before it was removed. But in those hours, it spread like wildfire. Young people shared screenshots, couples posted broken heart emojis, and hashtags appeared on Telegram. Hashtag love is not illegal, hashtag toy Czechlandmagant weddings aren't gone. That afternoon, she met Jasur again in a small cafe near the old cinema district. He had seen the article and looked both proud and worried. "You knew this could cause trouble," he said quietly. Laylo smiled faintly. "Maybe trouble is what love needs right now." Before they could say more, her phone buzzed, an official message from her editor. "The ministry has requested an explanation. You're suspended until further notice." Laylo's breath caught. Her career, everything she'd worked for, was slipping away. Jasur reached across the table, his rough hands brushing hers. "You told their story. That matters more than any job," he said. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. Around them, the cafe hummed with life, students whispering, old men playing dominoes, the hiss of steaming teapots. And yet, for a moment, everything was still. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under pale sunlight. Jasur stood and looked at her. "Come," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He led her through narrow alleys to a small courtyard behind a faded blue gate. Inside, several young couples were gathered, holding hands, exchanging vows quietly before an elderly man. No music, no photographers, just whispered promises and smiles. "This is what we've started," Jasur said softly. "We call it the Circle of Hearts. No decorations, no audience. Just love." Laylo watched, overwhelmed. It was raw, imperfect, beautiful. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "They banned weddings, but not this." Jasur looked at her and nodded. "No one can ban love if it's real." That night, under a flickering streetlight, he walked her home again. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was full of meaning. Before leaving, Jasur turned to her, eyes full of quiet determination. "If they take your voice, I'll make sure they still hear your story." Laylo smiled through tears. "And if they take your freedom," she said softly, "I'll make sure they know why." A cold winter wind swept across Tashkent weeks later, carrying with it both silence and tension. The government had tightened its grip, new surveillance laws, stricter penalties for unauthorized gatherings, and rumors of arrests linked to the Circle of Hearts. The air was heavy with fear. Yet in small corners of the city, people still whispered, still met in secret, still believed. Laylo hadn't written publicly since her suspension. Her editor stopped answering calls, and plainclothes officers had begun asking questions about her recent activities. But she refused to disappear. From a small, borrowed laptop in her cousin's apartment, she continued publishing under a pseudonym, writing about love stories that bloomed despite the bans, about couples who had found courage and simplicity. Every night, Jasur visited her quietly, always checking the street first, always carrying something, bread, hot tea, or just his calm presence. The world outside grew harsher, but inside, their connection deepened into something unbreakable. One night, he arrived soaked from the rain, his breath visible in the cold air. "Laylo," he said urgently, "they've started questioning people from the circle. They're looking for whoever's behind the stories. They think it's me." Laylo's face went pale. "You have to leave, Jasur. Go to your parents in the countryside. I'll handle this." But Jasur shook his head. "No, I won't run. We did nothing wrong. All we did was love, and show that others could, too." That night, they didn't speak much. They sat near the window, watching the snow fall over the sleeping city. Laylo rested her head on his shoulder, and he whispered, "If they come for me, don't stop writing. Promise me." She didn't answer, only held his hand tighter. Days later, the inevitable happened. Jasur was detained during a small street gathering, not a protest, not even a speech, just couples standing silently, hand in hand. The government called it a symbolic act of disobedience. Laylo watched the video online in horror, seeing Jasur's face in the crowd, calm even as officers pulled him away. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then something inside her broke, and rebuilt itself stronger. That night, she wrote again. Her words poured out like a storm. "You can silence a crowd, but you can't silence love. You can arrest a man, but you can't cage his heart." The post spread across every Uzbek platform before the authorities could block it. Thousands shared it. Strangers began leaving flowers outside government buildings. Couples posted photos of themselves holding hands with the caption, #ForJasur, #love is not illegal. 2 weeks later, after mounting pressure and quiet outcry, Jasur was released. Thin, tired, but smiling. Laylo met him at the edge of the old bridge over Angkor River, where the city lights shimmered in the water. He said nothing at first, just took her hands. "I told you I'd come back," he whispered. Laylo's eyes filled with tears. "And I kept writing," she said softly. There were no guests, no ceremony, no witnesses, just the cold air, the hum of the river, and their hearts beating in rhythm. Under that bridge, they exchanged vows. No papers, no rings, only words. "They can change the rules," Laylo said, smiling through tears. "But they'll never change what love means."